Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for coming. Thanks so much for coming to the panel on data dignity. I'm Christian, and I'm joined today with four wonderful colleagues, with Christoph, with Aurelia, with Eduard, and with Vanessa. And yeah, we thought we start with a little bit of input on different perspectives on dignity, on the right to be seen. And then hopefully we have a bit of a discussion with all of you. We thought we start with Aurelia. Aurelia will give us, I think, a bit of a general overview what we mean by digital dignity, some concepts, and then start to kind of like go into different applications in the world of work, in the world of robotics, and in the world of privacy. I think we like to have it somewhat informal, so kind of like whenever you already have an immediate input, please raise your hands, but we also have hopefully ample time for discussion. With that being said, thanks so much for being here, Aurelia, and yeah, let's hear what we have.
Thank you so much for an invitation. Yeah, so as Christian said, like the idea of this very short input presentation is to give a bit of a general overview over the theme of today, so data dignity. And that then Edward, Chris, and Vanessa do the deep dives into to give off different perspectives. So the idea is to kind of then be able to a bit systematically map these discussions that we will hear from Christoph, Edward, and Vanessa onto a bit more kind of what has happened on a regulatory level and what we can, how we can map these concepts. Yeah, so when I agreed to do this, I didn't realize that depending on how broad you look at the topic, there's quite a bit of literature on this. And so I'm just going to give you a bit of a summary of the things that I think are most important in the field. I want to start with zooming out and talking a bit about this concept of dignity. And we talk here about data dignity, and I will give you in a bit a kind of an input of what the literature has said on data dignity. But for now, what I would like to focus on is how data dignity is tied to this notion of human dignity, and there's so much great literature on human dignity and dignity in the age of AI. And one way to best understand human dignity is almost to do the reverse, and that's okay. When is human dignity violated? And this doesn't come from me, but this comes from Halbert Hall, who points out that there are three broader categories of violations of dignity, and he talks about humiliation, so being put in a state of helplessness, insignificance, losing autonomy over your own representation. He talks about also this aspect of instrumentalization. This is the second category. So when you treat an individual as exchangeable, like merely a means to an end, and then also the rejection of your own gift or one's own gift. So when you make an individual like superfluous, like you're not acknowledging the contribution of that human, the potential aspiration and the potential of that individuals. And so, as I said, like Christoph and Edward will talk about, perfect, it's here. I don't see the slides. Yeah, we'll talk also a bit about we'll showcase in the specific aspects within the domain of effective computing and robotics, and then more general representations within AI of how these violations can occur. But of course, you can already, imagine it when you think of black boxes AI, where we feel helpless with respect to a decision that is being taken, and we don't feel lose our autonomy to understand how we are represented. Also the aspect of instrumentalization, right? When you are treated more as a data point for instance, possible advertisements. And individuals or data points are kind of exchangeable at this point. Or also when you think of AI tools that replace the human task force and thus render human contribution like superfluous, and you don't acknowledge necessarily the human contribution. And I think what is interesting here to see is how this concept of human dignity is connected to the protection of other fundamental rights. And it is Evengi Eisenberg and Joren van den Hoven who have written on how human dignity can serve as a basis for design considerations in AI system. And so the framework on the slides come from them. I made some omissions and just to keep it a bit more simple and amended it slightly, but the idea is from them. And they talk about, so dignity that which includes like a right to life, a right to physical, but also mental integrity, and the connections with the freedom rights, the equality rights, and solidarity aspects. So, you know, freedoms include like the right to liberty, security, private life, data protection, but also the right to information, freedom of expression, freedom of thought, and many more. But also equality, which includes also non-discrimination, as a topic that Edward is going to be talking about in a bit. And also these aspects of solidarity, right? The rights of workers to obtain information, to have fair and just working conditions, to be protected in the event of unjustified dismissal, and many more. And the way these authors frame it, they use it as a notion that can serve then as a basis for design considerations. And what is interesting is also that, of course, these concepts are also connected to other, you know, approaches that are codified not only on the human rights level, but in directive, regulation standards, etc. And so from these criteria, we can then also define more context-dependent specifications to ensure that the right to dignity is not violated. So as I said, like, what are we talking about when we say this idea of data dignity? And in the literature, or one way that it is framed, at least from Lanier and Vale, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing the authors' names correctly here, is that data dignity means that individuals should have this right of control, and also especially the right to get remunerated for their data. And this is not per se a new idea, right? We've seen lots of work on decentralization, personal data stores, or also this idea of monetization of data, which also plays very well with this narrative of data is the new oil, which, you know, has been criticized enough for us not to have to repeat now the issues with these narratives. And so this is a too narrow of an approach. And when you think back of the slide just before, right, the framework, did it work? Yes. You can see that if you connect it to that literature, yeah, thanks, that we should think about human dignity, data dignity also a bit much broader, or we can think of it much broader. So that is connected to this concept that I just mentioned. So that it's connection to this concept, but it also needs to come with this toolkit of more actionable tools, and measures and rights that we can like use it for. And this is where also this idea of right to be seen, which is also in the panel descriptions, comes in for. But maybe before talking about this right to be seen, which Edward is going to be discussing after me, just on a higher level, why is this even needed? And why are we even talking about data dignity and the right to be seen? Many people have argued that data is this new oxygen and the power of the world, because you need a lot of data for AI systems. But at the same time, and we've noticed this for a long time, right, you have also data divides or data deserts, where you have domains or populations or part of populations that are just not represented either within the data, and then thus also not represented within the model. And this is then this question of, like, okay, how can we be seen in the data, and how can we ensure that everyone is represented within these models? And this is where we start looking for new or tools, or think about old principles and how they can possibly be applied to this in order to ensure this data dignity. And one way of doing so could be by interpreting current norms more broadly. So we have this principle of accuracy, right, which focuses at the moment very narrowly on correcting wrong information. It's often, accuracy is always, like, the principle is always understood as dependent of context, and is a relative term which also aligns with the OECD data quality concept or notion. But we can also interpret this accuracy principle more broadly to think more of competence rather than accuracy. So focusing more, So focusing more, more on the output rather than the input, and thinking about whether or not the system has made a competent decision overall, so focusing more on the motives, the decision criteria, the assumptions of the AI decisions. So this is one way of doing it, and this other idea that Edward is going to be talking about is the right to be seen and to really demand an adequate representation. And through transparency obligations, we can identify possible data divides, underrepresentation, and can also address this and demand maybe more balanced data representations. And this is also, again, tied to these concepts of freedom, equality, and solidarity that I mentioned above. And the idea is through these rights and approaches to really combat more like data determinism, statistical dehumanization, maybe even possible chilling effects that can occur, discrimination, a topic that we will touch upon, I think, also through Christopher's presentation, and enable a more accurate self-representation, also something that will be picked up in the next presentations. There are also moments where we just don't want to be seen at all, of course, and we've seen this especially with facial recognition or during the COVID pandemics, and this is also good reasons for that, because yeah, we want to have also the ability to be able to change our minds and have a clean state, etc. So there is always going to be a bit this tension or different interests that can be at play here. And so the final point of this short introduction before we go into the deep dives is we will have to analyze things in context, which is also why the deep dives are within the field of affecting computing, work, representation, and privacy, in order to show how kind of these different elements play in together. And one work, for instance, by a thesis just by Lex Otsar just came out, and he focuses on dignity as well, but in the context of advertisement. And I think there will be more and more work and research exactly within such more narrow field in order to be able to really explain the specific tensions that are also at play and how to resolve that. So I think this was all from my side, so that we can move on to the deep dives, and I hand this over to you. And I thank you for your attention.
No, thank you, Aurelia, and also thank you, Christian, for allowing me also to be here. So when I was tasked to be part of this panel, and when we were talking about the dignity, I was very much romanced by this right to be seen, and I think that our students know that diversity and inclusion are oftentimes topics that they are not that well covered in education, research, and nevertheless they have like ulterior impacts that have adverse consequences if we miss them in our work. So what I wanted to bring here today was how then a right to be seen in AI and robotics could look like, and also how inadvertently some of these systems reinforce stereotypes that it could be that depending on where we are looking at, it might directly affect the accuracy and fairness across different groups. And these can cause harms in a way that humans cannot necessarily correct or oversee, especially if we are thinking about systems that they have an embodiment. So starting already like with the first one, that they may have inadvertently reinforced stereotypes. As a very quick introduction on this is that there has been like this rise of different smart systems that they are meant to be helping us with information provision, and also to be there all the time for us. And as you notice very quickly with all of these chatbots, is that the majority of them, they have female names. They also are in serviceable contexts, reinforcing ideas of gender stereotypes of roles that men or women may play. And this list does not only apply for chatbots or smart speakers, but they also have some examples, for instance, in banking systems. So the idea that the Annas and the Evas and the Cortanas will be always there for us to give us information, whereas we don't see the same representation like of men in the same context. In the field of robotics, or like why this is linked, is that because we also see that there are some robotics and AI systems that can reinforce those stereotypes through their design and their embodiment. For instance, in this case, there is not an apparent reason why the robot actually had a prominent breast region in order to perform the tasks of the robot. But this is sometimes a representation of those biases that they are way ingrained in our society, and that we believe that this is something okay to have. Now, missing diversity, equity, and inclusion elements in effective computing, for instance, datasets, can directly affect the accuracy and fairness of emotion recognition algorithms across different groups. So I wanted to bring here today just like a very brief overview of a paper that we worked together with Tessa, who is a colleague in our computer science department. So what we departed from is that diversity in effective computing basically is very much crucial in this domain, because effective computing systems are increasingly developed for sensitive contexts as healthcare and education. They also capture subjective states through technical means, which is quite challenging. But what we know is that poor data sets that fail to account for intersectional differences can result in discriminatory outcomes. And as we like to say also at the School of Law, is that discrimination is prohibited by law. Something that sometimes this narrative that just is fueled by concepts like diversity and inclusion seems to reinforce the idea that those concepts are just like mere ethical considerations to take into account, or that it would be nice to have, whereas these are extremely important from the legal perspective. So what we did with Tessa, to understand a little bit like what was the magnitude of these issues, that we reviewed all the different various ways in which like human traits are used in order to express emotion. And what we did is to analyze the data sets that are commonly used in effective computing to understand like how diverse and inclusive they are. So to understand like whether there are people that they're seen or not in those data sets. And what we realized, first of all, is that for human traits, there are physical and psychological markers used to recognize emotions, which are facial recognition, facial expressions, vocal tones, body posture, gestures, and so on. That there are algorithms based on these markers that they might have different outcomes for different groups, and this refers to age, health conditions, and gender. And what we know is that, for instance, when it comes to age groups, we know that children's face expressions and speech are less distinct than that of adults because they might not have a full range of emotions. That there might be some changes in facial appearance due to aging or also due to plastic surgery, but also that there are like some health conditions that actually affect older adults and that might affect like these emotional expressions. We also know that individuals with depression or schizophrenia often have a flattened effect. And on the contrary, also non-neurotypical individuals may have difficulty in expressing some of the emotions. And people suffering from PTSD, they might also display exaggerated emotional responses to certain events. And what we know also is that there are differences among cultures that sometimes that they are not captured by some of the systems because the majority of them might be developed in Western individuals. And Tessa has worked a lot also on sign language, for instance. So like there's also a lack of representation of the deaf community in the development of some of these systems, and that has, of course, had different consequences. Just to finish this point, we also know that that the data sets may have gender biases. And we know that also data sets may work better, or they may perform better, not when there is an equal representation of the genders, but actually when there is an overrepresentation of the, in this case, the gender that we want to have. But that there are other factors that play a role in here. So just going back to the main point that we were saying is that not having or missing this diversity consideration is problematic. And when we looked at then like through these diversity lenses, what we did was to analyze 26 data sets that usually are used in affective computing. And we looked at the speech, face, body, physiological signals, but also multimodal. There is like this idea that emotional recognition systems could work better, like if they use a multimodal approach. And we use like these lenses to understand to what extent then these aspects that very much play a role in human traits and age, they affect that. So with respect to ethnicity, what we realized is that basically the majority of the papers, they were in the Western part and predominantly used with white, and that was confirmed like in the different modalities that we looked at. We also saw that the majority of the age that was represented was between 20 and 30 years old. Those of you that run experiments, you might usually run into the same issue, that usually you engage your students to participate to the experiments that we do. So the data was more or less on that age range. And when it comes to sex, what we realize is that the majority of the data sets, they did include male and female subjects. However, what we realize is that gender, usually it is understood as the same as sex, whereas like we know by now that sex and gender are not the same, being the gender identity like who you perceive yourself to be, and your sex, the anatomical traits that you are born with. And with respect to health, none of the papers that we reviewed included or mentioned any population with different mental health conditions. And some of them, they also deliberately excluded them, like this might have to do with reasons with respect to clinical trials and also the complications that it have. So the main point that that we concluded is that our work reveals some gaps in the representation of diverse populations in these data sets. And this is particularly regarding ethnicity, age, gender, and health. And this lack of diversity may limit the generalizability of affective technologies to certain populations. And this can lead to the identification of false positive and negatives, which may have serious consequences for subjects if these algorithmic systems entail health-related outcomes, not only in terms of discrimination, but what we believe that it is more important is on safety terms. So moving forward, what we want to have, and perhaps we can open the floor later to hear your thoughts about what could we do, but like our idea is that we could make inclusion of diverse data a priority, so to have like way more people represented on that. However, there are like many constraints with respect to how are we going to do that, and also clashes like with data protection, data minimization, etc. Whether there should be like a standardized documentation method that we should follow and include relevant demographic factors in data sets. But also, how are we going to test these on diverse participants to make sure that recognition accuracy is generalized across populations? And also to understand whether there are different consequences for different populations. And I think that I want to leave it like this, or because there are like a lot of slides, but I think that perhaps it's better. But just like to finish this, I just want to say that this example pushes for the understanding that when we are talking about a right to be seen, what we realize is that there's many people that they are not seen in this data. And when you put that into the context of having applications that they are developed for healthcare, for education, for children, for elderly persons, you risk to have well, poor performance of these systems. And my work, or what would follow here, that I will just quickly go because otherwise we will not have the slides of the next presenter. What we see also is that this even goes farther when when we enter to the realm of robotic technology that exert forces that that sometimes they have destructive forces in our world. And that it is something that we need to bear in mind. So thank you so much for your time. And I'm just like quickly going like this because, but if you're interested, I'm very happy like to talk a lot like about this. So yeah, there you go.
Thank you, Eduard, and thank you, Christian, for organizing this panel. Great to be here. I will talk about the world of work and representation, a right to be seen in an occupational context. So we now switch to the more macro level in a way. And I will present the study that we recently published in collaboration with the ILO, the International Labour Organization in Geneva, where we look in AI's role in evaluating job prestige and value. So we kind of benchmark or compare how GPT-4 evaluates a host of pretty much the whole spectrum of occupations. You can think of blue-collar jobs, white-collar jobs, across the whole spectrum of jobs. And we were interested in seeing how does GPT-4 perform in that regard. Is it similar to how humans assess occupations in terms of prestige and social value? But the starting point for this research is a much longer history of sociological research, where people have been interested in the prestige of different occupations. You can think of a bricklayer, you can think of an accountant, taxi driver, management consultant, all different types of occupations. But when we looked into the literature, we found that the most recent data set that a lot of people use still to publish today is from 2012. And it uses occupation titles such as organizer for religious crusade, oil well driller, oil well pumper, oil rig worker, oil refining equipment operator. So like 10 different oil jobs, but it doesn't reflect the occupational reality in Netherlands or in Belgium, or even in Thailand or in other countries. So this is a very US-centric list of occupations in the first place. And we then also found that there is a rich discussion in the popular media, in media and social media, about what David Graeber called bullshit jobs. Maybe you've seen that book. It was on the New York Times bestseller list. And it kind of makes the point that a lot of occupations today that we see are kind of meaningless or don't really add value to society. And here, especially middle management occupations, for example, consultants, corporate lawyers, he also calls them kind of a bullshit job, but a lot of these white-collar jobs that have emerged in the last 10, 20, 30 years. So there's a rich literature on this topic, but we don't really know how AI is kind of fitting in the picture. So if you want to read a bit more about this, this notion, we have two articles that just came out, one maybe a month ago, This first one that we published very recently. And the second one just came out a few days ago, actually in the Journal of Business Research, where we look more into emerging occupations, such as those on social media, the gig economy, and AI as well. So the second paper that you see here has quite a lot of context and discussion around emerging AI occupations. But today I want to talk about the ILO paper and that study, where we actually did the following. We first did a large-scale survey. We had like over 2,400 respondents in the UK. We asked them about the prestige and social value of quite a few different occupations. And we tried to have a relatively representative sample in terms of age, gender, and ethnic minority status as well. We asked the respondents to rate 576 occupations. Not all of them, so we batched them. So each respondent had to rate about 200 of these occupations. And you see that the way they did this was quite immersive in a way. Trying to move to the next slide. For some reason, it's stuck. There you go. So now we are on too far. I'm going to go one back. So this is how they pretty much responded to the survey. They had to use a slider, and they had to rate these occupations on a scale from 0 to 100. And you see here some examples. For example, food blogger, technology startup founder, and so on. And then for the study, we also did the same with GPT-4. So Pavel, he's the first author of the paper, the senior data scientist at the ILO. So he had access to the GPT-4 API. So he could he could loop through the API and do a lot of commands and prompts. And here you see the prompt that we used to access the API. We basically put GPT-4 in the role of a survey respondent and asked it to assess the prestige of the occupations that we had. And then we did that 50 times for each occupation and averaged the value and then compared it to the human responses. But now let's see some of the results, because I think this is most interesting. We did find overall that the GPT-4 was quite good. For example, it did find the relations between the occupations, so the correlations are quite high between the human scores and the GPT-4 scores, but with some exceptions. For some occupations, GPT-4 was not very good. I'm going to show you some of these exceptions because they are very interesting. So on the right hand here, you see the occupations where GPT-4 was really pretty bad in terms of assessing the prestige of these jobs. And you see a lot of them are in sales and in digital economy, like marketing manager, social media marketing manager, data center manager, and so on. Charity collector was an occupation it really didn't assess well. On the other hand, we had the occupations that it underestimated, where it thought it had actually much higher prestige, much lower prestige, sorry. So here you see actually quite a few divergences where GPT-4 was not very good. I think the next one, the social value, is more interesting, even because some of the occupations where GPT-4 was really far off is chatbot operator, chatbot conversation trainer, and also email marketer. So a lot of or YouTuber as well. So kind of the occupations that directly benefit GPT-4 and large language models, especially the chatbot operators and chatbot trainers. These roles we included to kind of assess, and GPT-4 was much more generous in giving these scores. On the other hand, you see occupations such as a rickshaw driver, hunter-gatherer. I mean, these are less common in the UK where we did the study, but these were much underestimated by GPT-4. We also did demographic partitions, so we checked in the survey for which groups is GPT-4 not as predictive, not as good. And we saw that male, non-white, 55 plus, the scores deviated most from those respondents. Also female, non-white, so especially the non-white group, GPT-4 was not as good in predicting their prestige and social value scores. So we did see some of these biases that I think are very interesting. I'm going to sum up because I think we don't have so much time left. But we found that the average human prestige and social value scores between GPT-4 and humans were quite strongly correlated. However, there's some caveats to that because overall GPT-4 overestimated most occupations. So we had to standardize the scores, and that way they were strongly correlated, but it misrepresents many occupations, as you saw. Also, the bias in terms of the groups that it corresponds most or least with, so female and white respondents were kind of more aligned with GPT-4 than male and non-white respondents. And finally, I want to talk a little bit about the, I think I have to click a million times, but now we have the implications. Also in relation to the topic of the panel, we kind of make the argument in the paper about the technological construction of society. That's the title, where AI representations increasingly feed back into society. So for example, if GPT-4 creates counseling and guidance in terms of careers, and you see a certain occupation completely misrepresented, this could be a problem. So we can ask questions like, what are the implications when LLMs increasingly serve as career counselors? And maybe even more abstractly, how do we conceptualize AI systems not only as practical tools, but also symbolic tools as they increasingly make meaning that feeds back into society? And who is represented in terms of the data in these occupational evaluations, and who is left out? So that's all from me. Thank you very much, and I'll hand over to Vanessa.
Okay, so hello everyone. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you, Christian, for the invitation. I'll try to be quick to also have some time for your questions and for some discussions. So on this, right? Okay. So my topic here is about the economic value of the personal data, and it is based on my doctoral thesis. And now I'm a lecturer within the Bucharest University of Economic Studies, so I will speak a bit about this. We heard many times that the personal data and data is the new oil, and maybe if you want to imagine data as the new currency of the digital age, you might not think about it like this, because when you speak about a currency, you actually think about paper dollars or, I don't know, online transactions. But if you think about the fact that businesses actually develop their new products and new services based on your preferences, you might see the fact that, okay, your personal data might be a currency. So we have to understand why it is so important to attribute an economic value to it, and to understand and be aware of the fact that this data is collected, processed, and sometimes you don't know exactly where it ends up. So we have this privacy paradox. Now I want you to imagine this situation. So you enter a website and it appears that pop up with accept all cookies. Maybe you can raise your hands if you just clicked on accept all the cookies, yeah? It's really easy to do that. You don't want that initially. I don't want to accept all the cookies and maybe share some personal info with that website, but just to get over with it, you just click accept it all. And what you initially thought of strongly against it, you just go with it, because yeah, it's the easiest way to do it. So that's the privacy. That's the best example of the privacy paradox. Yeah, you just do it. Why? Because it is a habit. Yeah, it's a convenient habit. It is the immediate gratification of entering that website really quickly. Maybe you cannot associate your value of the personal data with something that is really valuable. So you might think, okay, it's just a cookie, not a big deal. But it happens also with other kind of personal data, not only with cookies. Sometimes you just give personal data for free in exchange of an economic good, that it is something, I don't know, you receive it and you feel like you received it for free, but actually it was not for free, right? Okay, and I've created this focus group with 96 people, and we asked them to attribute an economic value. We had predefined values for different elements. And I've selected a few of them. So, religious view, Google search history, and health data. How much would you like to receive for this type of data? Yeah? And we had €5, €50, €100 for free, or you would absolutely not sell it. And we can see there is a range, yeah, of people. Some of them would just give it for free. We can see religious view, maybe it's not such a big deal. So 22% said, okay, I would just give it for free. Others would ask €100 for it. But if we go further with Google search history, they say, okay, 56% would not sell it, and then even for health data, okay, 64% would not sell it for anything in the world. Then we have 3 other elements, so sexual orientation, the result of a genetic test, and the geolocation. Actually, these are, at least for geolocation, you can see it's the highest regarded as I would not sell that, but you actually give it for free. So many times. So yeah, it's when you are asked, okay, what is the value of that data, you might better understand the fact that, okay, it is really valuable, so I should really not share it with a third party. And here I've put some prices that are on the dark web according to Privacy Affairs, so that you can really understand the fact that, okay, personal, okay, you don't have exactly those elements, but those elements might be comprised in your, I don't know, social media account. Yeah, so there are several, yeah, thank you. There are several accounts here where you can actually find those elements that were shown before, yeah? And you can see that it is really on sale in online. But okay, so we had this first scenario, and maybe we all know it. Some Netflix or HBO or now Max offers you 1 month of free access to its platform. And would you be willing to provide your full name, email, phone number, credit card for this promotion? Yes, I would. But do you know where is this data collected, how secure it is, their database? Do you know, for example, Netflix is really, it's not a really transparent company. Yeah, you don't even know the history of what you watched. So you don't know exactly how is your data stored. Okay, you can read the privacy policy and so on. But if, for example, one of these databases is hacked, your data can be stolen and can be sold online. This is one scenario. And the other one is that they can use your data to do a criminal activity, and then you will need, I don't know, maybe years to prove your innocence because they just use your personal details that were found online. And you have to think about these scenarios, yeah? This is also when you want to return or to exchange a product. Sometimes the stores ask for your ID card, and they should not do it because it's your right, for example, to return a product. Yeah, you don't have to give your ID for that. And the last one. Here I don't say that you should not go to festivals, but maybe we should put a bit of pressure on the companies. to be more transparent on how they collect, how they process our data, because we give it away and we should be aware on how they actually use it. And yeah, that's it. So the result of my focus group, after analyzing all the data and the demographics, we found out that the profile of the most vulnerable person online are women aged 80-25 from urban areas who have completed high school and are not employed at the moment. So this was the profile that we found out in Romania, but it would be interesting maybe to recreate this focus group or even do some surveys and to see what is the profile of the European customer, that is the most vulnerable, and maybe to create some campaigns to make them aware on how important their personal data is, because as said before, it is really important, and if you attribute an economic value next to your data and you understand its economic value, you would not give it for free as easily as we do it now. Okay, thank you. That's it.
Thank you very much, Vanessa, Eduard, Aurelia, and Christoph. According to the theme, we of course also want to see you. We want to open the floor for discussion. I just want to summarize just really, really quickly, and I hope I likewise saw you, right? But just for me as an observer, I think you all bring really, really interesting facets to this discussion of dignity. So starting with you, Aurelia, this idea which stuck with me was this idea of how do you make yourself seen? And is that also a binary, or is it something which is maybe temporally different, right? In which situations do we want to be seen? When do you want to be retracting your permission to be seen? I think, Eduard, you brought a really nice, for me, perspective in terms of how do we normatively see someone, in which type of gender, in which type of representation do we see someone, and how maybe for better or worse, it might be maybe not counterintuitive, but maybe when it comes to robotics, predominantly female, right? Kind of like, what does that mean for visibility? And is that visibility, or is that then the male or the engineer's gaze? Interesting to me. Christoph, I really like the point. I mean, I'm just my impressions, right? But that you bring up the idea of bullshit jobs, which I would disagree, by the way, with the author there, right? Because bullshit jobs, my job is 99% bullshit, but that has something to do with, obviously, with the complexity of the world, right? And that if we are increasingly make our world more complex, of course, tasks become much, much more minute, but we still make the world arguably a better place, right? I mean, if you come like look at when we didn't have bullshit jobs, you don't want to live in a medieval society, although it might have been super cool to be a knight in shining armor, but the society kind of sucked. And Vanessa, I think kind of like you also really bring up really nice point now, coming myself from a business school, in terms of valuation, right? What type of mechanism, a market mechanism, a legal mechanism, whatever type of mechanism, we want to maybe value dignity or a right to be seen with, right? Is that something which is a normative value? Is that an economic incentive? But let's figure out. So if you have any inputs, questions, comments, shall I make maybe we start with the lady here. Oh, we can also do that if we have a microphone going around.
Yeah, I think we should, because I think it's being broadcast too, so or recorded in any case. I'm chewing a little bit on. So my name is Francine Schane. I'm professor, associate professor of ethics and digital technologies at the ILO Center in Leiden. I'm chewing a little bit on this concept of a right to be seen. It makes it something very individual, whereas I think the problem is the obligation for the producer of these systems to represent, to make sure that everybody is represented. I personally, individually, I find it a creepy idea to be seen all the time. And also that if I want to be represented, then that it feels also a little bit uncomfortable for me that it is up to me to claim my right. Whereas I would think if you make a system for the examples that you've used, why is it not the responsibility of the other party to make sure that the data on which the system is built, that it's representative for and relates to the context, is adequate for the context. I also have issues with accuracy. But let's not go into that. I was going to write a paper with David from the FRA 6 years ago when this was a hot topic of debate. But so this call for a right to be seen incites with me awkward feelings of stepping into a frame that I think is kind of not where we want to go. I think we should reverse it. It's kind of related to the data subject rights approach in the GDPR that you can also question, is that the right answer for big data? Going back to the 3 paradoxes of big data by Richness and King. So the identity paradox. I mean, it's those 3 paradoxes, power paradox, that's there. So that was one thing, and the other thing is maybe something for later or individually.
If you don't mind, can I just I'm so happy you bring this up. I think this distinction between individual and societal goals, I totally agree, and I do think this is very interesting, and it also reminds you of the consent debates and the problem that you have, right, when you kind of put things on an individual level. And that being said, that's why I'm also kind of intrigued by why you think then a principle-based approach wouldn't work. Because like, if you say, because that would mean, right, that, okay, you agree on kind of in principle, let's say, like you talk less about accuracy, but more about competence. And that you put that responsibility away again from an individual to defining in society what that would mean, like a competent system that is represents everyone. So I'm intrigued by that, but maybe that's a side discussion that we will need to have, because that's a bit the idea. Yes. Yes. It depends on how, it depends on how you define the right to be seen and how you conceptualize it. And it's something also kind of that is emerging where there's a lot of discussions. I think, I mean, as I said before, right, there are also like these different tensions, literally, that you just mentioned. The idea, though, if you say, okay, you need to put it away from the individual layer to kind of more agreed upon societal implication and discussions on, so that a system becomes like, I don't know, socially, anchored, exactly, that then maybe this idea of going more towards kind of design principles of it would maybe fit better the scope of what we actually want to achieve in the long run. But I'm sure that the other panelists have something very smart to say about this.
Sorry, very briefly. But I think since I'm not a lawyer, so I come more from a social science perspective, but for me, it comes down to agency. Like, can you determine at your own terms when to be seen, if you want to be seen? A lot of people don't want to be seen. I think that's a very valid point. We don't want that visibility. Other people do want to be seen. There's really good work by Payal Aurora at Utrecht University. She makes the point that people in the global south often care less about privacy, but they care much more about visibility. They want to be seen, they want to express themselves. So I think we have to really look at the context, and these tensions play out in different ways depending on how it happens. So what Christian said, the situational aspects are crucial, I think, and we shouldn't push people in the other extreme. But I think there is a valid point to raise about kind of the responsibility, not only of the individual, but also of the developers, of the institutions, and maybe also of the governments.
Hello, my name is Anja Dekhuizen. I have 2 questions. I will ask them one by one. My first question is, because I'm rather intrigued by your title. So if you say, is there a need for a new right? My first question is, structure-wise, where should that right be incorporated in? I mean, because you didn't, not that I hear. So what is your idea about this? Do you mean a new charter right or somewhere else? Should the AI Act already be? Well, how do you envisage this?
I could give it a try. Like that's a great point that I didn't think about. No, so like where would this right be? No, whether this it is in the fundamental right charter, like if it is in the AI Act, and so I think that in my opinion, what we see is that right now there is a little bit of a regulatory turmoil with respect to AI and also with other pieces of legislation. So the European regulator is trying to catch up actually with all of these advancements. So we see the machinery directive being a regulation, we have the medical device regulation, we have the product safety now also regulation and being updated on that, and also the new AI Act. Whereas I think that more than like a proposal, a formal proposal on a right to be seen, which I think that it would translate to then of an obligation to the developer, like, or that would might be my idea. I think that we wanted like to really push is on what are the ways in which we could make then these discussions on diversity inclusion much more visible in all of these advancements. Especially when we see that there are ulterior impacts that sometimes are not that well captured, like with non-discrimination approaches or transparency and other much more clear rights that they are already in this charter. So like for me, like it is a little bit more like of is it enough, the current regulatory pushes that we have, or do we need to reflect on these new emerging rights or needs that could be to be seen, to be heard, to be felt, but that for sure they try to prevent that there are adverse consequences for certain communities that usually they struggle already, like to have their voices heard in standardization activities, in in applications, etc.
Not an answer to my question. Eh?
Because I do not know where I
No,
would
it's okay.
place it in itself. At least for me, I do not know if you have an idea, Aurelia.
Yeah, no,
I'm
not
just
necessarily.
curious.
So yeah, sorry. Yeah, no, so maybe to build upon also on what Edward said. So no, not a direct answer to your question of where you would put it, but I think you kind of also almost need to take a step back, and that some of these aspects are so, and the step back would be transparency to even understand who and how are we represented, or studies like the one that Christoph kind of illustrates, okay, what do we even see in this data? And when you talk about this, then kind of the step before even being able to think about, are we seen, like, is everyone represented in whatever the tool is, that are transparency obligation, and yeah, that falls within an AI Act, right? Like that, like transparency obligation, or these concepts underneath that I mentioned, where dignity is connected to. These things we can actually, have in regulation standards, etc. And shedding light is kind of this first step here. And I think, at least that's how I also understand how this concept has emerged a bit, is more, it's not about the formalization of it, but much more of a changing of a mindset to say, hey, this is a problem. I would like to kind of raise my hand to this. And I guess a right is just the easiest thing to kind of be like, hey, I want this. But I think it's much more of a notion or a concept, as Edward said, that is kind of, just been emerging without it being formalized necessarily.
Second question, if I may, and it ties into your question, because I understand what you're saying, and the right to be seen, so the right to be included in anything, like it's training or anything, so that we don't, but then I'm thinking ahead, what is your purpose? Your purpose is, as I understand it, perhaps not necessarily to be seen, because we are now talking about groups more than on individual level, that's what you were saying. But I think what you're trying to avoid is biased outcomes, I think, or not.
It depends. Like I think that when some of these biased outcomes are very individualistic, I would say, no? Like whenever like you are like interacting with a system that is making you company, for instance, because you are like an older adult at home, and so you are part of that interaction, and this is talking to you. So in a way, this right to be seen, for me, it is both individual and also group. Like I wouldn't really make that much of a distinction because, of course, there needs to be into consideration that whenever like we want to have like some of these systems, when we are pushing for personalized medicine and other concepts that are very much personalized, it's in that moment in which like it really matters that all of the intersectionalities that make yourself as unique are there represented and taken into account. Of course, like when you are like building like these models, it is a little bit more difficult to have like that nuance. So that's why they're in the world of exoskeletons, for instance, they are trying like to understand like how we can make exoskeletons learn how humans walk, so that then they develop like gait pattern recognition models, so that then whenever then you're using the exoskeleton, then they can anticipate like your pace at a faster pace. So in a way, it goes in parallel, like a sort of like the development of this gait algorithm, which is generic, but then also like the adaptation to the person when it is in use, no, I would say. So I think that depending on the context of application and also the embodiment of the system or with whom it will be interacting, like it will be both to be seen in individual and groups, and avoiding biased results would be reductionistic to the impacts that some of these tools may have on us, because it might be that in some cases we're talking about discrimination and just not being represented, but in some cases, and in the field more on healthcare, we are really talking about safety, and we are really talking about other concepts that they are not just that much on discrimination, and then also there's like privacy and so on. So whereas yes, what it is the purpose, I think that then that would have to be further transposed into the particular application, which is very much context dependent, and also the embodiment, etc. No, like so, I would go for that for the response.
Well, because of time, I have just two short observations. The first one is we had 3 presentations, and they looked not very similar to me. And they are areas of research in their own right. What's to be gained by mentioning the right to be seen? It doesn't seem to stick for me. It doesn't make, what value does it add to the whole discussion? That's the first question. And the second one is about effective computing. Some people consider this field to be very suspect. You know about this. Okay, so are you not in the process of supplying some veneer of legitimacy to this suspect terrain? Because there's many people that say it's just bullshit. It should be banned.
I would say pseudoscience, but bullshit is accepted in this panel,
so
I think.
I heard you speaking, and you try. Is the right to update effective computing? Is that the way we want to go?
Yeah, just like jumping on this last question, what my colleagues think about the value that our presentations bring to the right to be seen. You're correct. So basically, what we see is that both with emotion recognition system and gender classifier systems, we are trying to infer inherent subjective states through objective means, and that may be prone to error. And it seems that it's not only me, but like many people, including Kate Crowdford and other people, like raising really much the point of calling this as a pseudoscience. And what we see with other colleagues, with Marco Giraudo, for instance, what we see is that it has been created a sort of a legal bubble, we call it this way, in which there's like this industry push of technology, in this case affective computing, and being fields of research out there, prominent researchers like Rosalind Picard and other people at MIT really pushing for the idea that systems can understand and can reproduce and express emotions. And then having so many applications and context of usage of those technologies, conferences, funding research, really investors and all of these, and then legislation like picking up on all of these and like as a sort of like reactive effect. And in a way, Shoshana Zuboff also highlights that sometimes these companies and these fields of research, they become too big to be crushed or like to be developed. So yeah, indeed, like I do not try to legitimize the field, but indeed there is a point there, like into understanding, well, can we fix this field of effective computing, or should we altogether think about whether this is actually accurate and whether this is actually going to be safe, and whether some of these systems may just need now no transparency obligations under the AI Act, or whether really like we should just like move to the category of prohibited because like we just believe that it's pseudoscience. So thanks for that comment.
Comment is well heard, but I maybe we comment on that, kind of like on the concluding remarks. I think, did you have your hand up, the gentleman here? I don't know, the gentleman in front of you. Did you have your hand up? Okay, then please the lady here in front. Thank you.
Hi, thank you first for the very enlightening discussion. Fun fact for Vanessa, I just sold my email ID downstairs for a free cookie. But yeah, coming to the discussion around what Christoph and Edward said, there is a paper by Stanford Journal that discusses whether the Roomba is a male or female entity. So to that extent, the paper says that most people associate that it is actually a female robot, so to say, even though it's not an android or a humanoid robot. So to that extent, I just wanted to hear what your views are, that even when there are no clear characteristics associated with humans that directly influence gender biases, and it's plainly associated with probably the act or occupation of a cleaner, and mostly women are cleaners. To that extent, do you think there is any role in the present digital age which can overhaul the concept behind what we can do to deal with such biases, even when things are not clearly human looking? And do you see the role of artificial intelligence maybe coming in to deal with gender stereotyping in the newer technologies and how they are used every day?
Yeah, that's the challenge. So in this room before this panel, it was another panel on offensive cyber attacks and security. So they said that in the near future, you might have AIs taking decisions in cyber attacks, yeah, in cybersecurity. So it's really important to have those AIs trained to include all, to have a total inclusion, yeah. Maybe it's not possible, but it's really important to not have biased opinions like we humans have. And that's what we are talking about, yeah, the right to be seen. So it should be inserted into AIs, unbiased, and if possible, yeah, with like you said, yeah, to have everything covered and everybody covered into those prompts. So when the AI responds and takes a decision, not to think about only females or white people, yeah, they should think about us as a whole. And yeah, maybe that's it.
Yeah, great question. For me, it also comes down to multi-stakeholder collaborations because, for example, with occupations, this is, I mean, GPT 3.5 and GPT-4 have not been around super long. And of course, a lot of the things we find out with thorough research, we only find out over time. So I think it also comes down to how our developers taking results from the research community, from civil society on board. Will they be actually interested in these studies, listening to them, and also bringing in occupational bodies, for example. At the ILO, there's always a big interest in unions, labor rights. So to have these voices on the table, I think is very important.
I just also wanted to, with respect to that last comment, for instance, the Netherlands has been doing a great effort into trying to bring to the spotlight their past with respect to slavery, for instance. So if you ever in The Hague, Maurits' house, it's a really great example in which they really took steps in really bringing back that story, like to all of the paintings with clear explanations, like who are the people in the paintings, whether those black men were slaves, etc., and so on. What I want to get with these is that there is always, when we think about robotics and AI systems, they are products, right? Like we are thinking about product safety. There's always a manual of use. There's always information from the producer. There's always a company and people that they have been designing the systems and also that explain to the users how to use the systems. One way to go about it could also be, say, I am Roomba and I am a vacuum cleaner and I am no male and no female. I just clean your floors. Just be cleaner, thank you. Like, so my job is, I don't know, no. So like, I think that there is still like some actions that I think that companies can contribute towards avoiding this narrative that chatbots need to be female, that like smart speakers are also female, that we see like the cleaning persons are like also females, no? Like we have also, I think, the role and responsibility to contribute towards that, because inevitably we all have certain visions of the world that they are marked by our own experiences, and we see, of course, that systems are also fueled by those experiences. No?
Thank you very much. Also, with a view on the time, I thank you, everyone. I also want to thank you about the final commentary, which I really didn't comment on yet, on the idea of the connective tissue. However, I think that's a good comment maybe going forward, right? So there's discussions of, do we want a right? How do different disciplines maybe speak to it? Is it a right? On what level? With that having said, we are 1 minute over the time. Thanks so much, everyone, for coming. Thanks so much for sharing your wonderful thoughts and ideas. And yeah, hopefully catch up a little bit later in a more social setting. Thanks so much.